There's a pressure on all us to succeed. We either push ourselves or try to meet other people's expectation. But when the whole world is struggling in these days, we all need a little bit of help. Some of us hire a coach. Some of us are coaches. We all have the capacity to coach ourselves. And there's no better time than now to develop our self-mastery and show ourselves some kind of kindness. So, self-coaching for leaders, is it possible, practical, or is it realistic? A very warm welcome to the show. This is season 7 of EI Cafe with Azim, and I'm your host Azim Sahil, a human capital specialist, a Lego serious play facilitator, ICF certified coach, an emotional intelligence and emotional culture tech practitioner. Here we are again for another interesting episode, a 30 minutes of valuable learning. You heard the introduction. In today's episode, we're going to talk about self-coaching. Yes, you heard it, self-coaching. To discuss this, I have one of my good connection. Let me introduce him. With over 25 years of experience in delivering a wide range of human capital solutions to a variety of organizations, and of course, have worked with CEOs and business leaders throughout this particular period. He believes that the most effective leaders are self-aware, emotionally intelligent, and have purpose in their lives. He coaches executives who understand the importance of self-leadership and want to fulfill their potential as human beings. He is an accredited associate of the Academy of Executive Coaches. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Andrew Tallents, founder and managing partner of Andrew Partnership, conscious leadership coach, author, and a motivational speaker. Andrew, welcome to EI Cafe.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
All right. So, Andrew, once and foremost, thank you very much for spending your valuable time in the cafe to inspire people, inspire leaders. So, it's quite interesting these days. And when we had this discussion on talking about self-leadership, I was quite amazed to see, like, we always hire coaches. We always go up to coaches seeking help. I was so impressed, and I got the opportunity to read your book as well. We'll talk a little bit on the book as well in our conversation. But then again, let's start the question in this particular way, the conversation. What is self-coaching, Andrew, we are talking about? Right? You see the introduction, we have been pushed, we have been pressurized for become successful. Of course, we get stuck and we go ask help, especially for coaches. And you have been working with business owners, business leaders, CEOs, and how come they can coach themselves? And what is this self-coaching? This is the first question I want to ask from you.
Sure, thank you. Well, I'll explain first how I discovered the importance of it, and then I'll explain exactly what it is, if that's okay. So what I noticed is that as I was coaching a variety of leaders, both chief executives and other leaders in organizations, that they became dependent on the coach relationship. So therefore, the way they developed themselves was because of the relationship they had with the coach and their coaching sessions. And when that relationship finished at whatever point, they went back to their old ways because they didn't have the coach to hold them to account anymore. So I thought about this about 3 or 4 years ago and wondered, is there a way to enable the leader to learn how to self-coach as they go through the coaching process, so that by the time they leave the coaching sessions, they're able to coach themselves on a daily basis? And so the best way to really explain what self-coaching is really the process of leading your own personal development as a leader by displaying self-leadership and using the support of others to help maximize your personal and professional potential. That's the way I would describe self-coaching. And it's not easy. We all hire fitness instructors when we want to get fit because we know they can hold us to account. But I've demonstrated self-coaching as a practice, and a lot of my clients have managed to do that as well.
Brilliant. I think it's an interesting perspective, right? We always have gone to coaches. We have understood the process. And it's a nice thought that why we can't coach ourselves, because we have experienced the process. We have experienced a framework. how it's getting done is something really amazing, Todd. Thank you for sharing that. I'm really curious. I was going through your book. In your book, you mentioned about the coaching cycle. In this particular coaching cycle, how this can create an impact for leaders in their life as a leader.
Sure. So the coaching cycle, as I describe in my book, is a very simple model where a leader tries to work through 3 stages of self-coaching. So the first stage I describe as reconnect. And what reconnect means is to actually ask the question of ourselves as a leader: who am I? Why am I here? And actually have that commitment around self-leadership to take me to what I want to do in my life, using my emotional intelligence. And that's what the reconnect is. And the reason that many leaders don't have the ability to reconnect is because they don't create time for themselves to reflect on those important questions. So that's the reconnect phase, and we can come back to that later. The second part of the cycle is refocus. Once we understand who we are and why we're here, and we have the emotional intelligence to move forward with our personal and professional dreams, it's about refocusing on what's important. So letting go of all the things that we shouldn't be doing, which is very hard for leaders because we enjoy doing certain things and like to keep control of certain things, but it's very hard if we're not refocusing. So refocusing is all about doing the essential tasks in life. It's making sure that we focus on the important relationships. It's making sure we build trust with other people so we can let go. And it's also making sure that we have that resilience, as we move forward. And then the final stage is what I call regeneration, which is about, if we understand who we are and we're refocusing on the things that are important to us, how do we emerge as this new leader, which is quite a dichotomy, because really it's actually the leader we used to be. It's letting go of some things, our natural leadership instincts. And that's the third phase, regeneration. And then we come back to the start of the cycle again, and we start again with, who am I now in this leadership role?
Right.
So that's in very basic terms how we go through. Yeah.
All right. So Andrew, it's really interesting. I'm curious, like when you're coaching on these particular processes, when you ask your clients or coaches, can you explain who are you, or answer the question of who am I? What sort of emotional state they go into?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So there are 2 ways to do this, depending on the leader. So the first is to either shock them into that question, to really get them to connect with, oh yeah, it's really important for me to understand that. I can talk about that in a second. But the second way is to use psychometrics, emotional intelligence tools, to allow them to gain some softer access to who they are. So they understand what a DISC profile or insight profile or emotional intelligence profile tells them about who they are. And that's a good place to start because it's usually a little bit softer. The harder way of doing it, which is a bit more impactful, is to actually ask the leader the very simple question: think about, who are you in relationship? And very few leaders can answer that question straight away. They have to really think. First of all, what does the question mean? And secondly, who am I in relationship? And that might be personal relationships, family relationships, professional relationships, relationships with my peers. It's all of that to understand how we show up in relationships. And that can enable the leader to start connecting a bit more with who they are. But it's a very slow process because leaders don't ask themselves these questions.
So I'm really curious. I'm keep asking questions, and I like the thought process. Can leaders really think for themselves these questions, ask themselves this question and answer this? Do they enough time? Do they create enough space within them to answer this? Because Andrew, I'm asking a question from you, and you don't need to spend a lot of time on asking the question for yourself, because it's a matter of answering, because leaders are used to ask questions from another person, right? KPIs,
Absolutely.
Performance numbers. Asking for yourself, how difficult is it?
It's really hard, but this is where I think leaders can ask for help. So what I tend to find is that most leaders are driven to be successful by something that happened earlier in their lives, which said, I have to work hard. I have to work hard to be successful. And that's what a lot of leaders do. and therefore they have very little time. So what leaders can do to help ask these questions of themselves is to ask their direct reports, to ask their peers, to ask their stakeholders to help them create space. I remember working with one client a few years ago who used to go in at 8 o'clock in the morning, finish at 7 o'clock in the evening, had no time for anybody. But what he did through self-coaching was to actually say, no, I'm actually going to take a walk in the morning. I'm going to turn up at 9 a.m. in the morning. I'm going to have no appointments. I'm just going to think for an hour before I take my first appointment. And that was very brave and courageous because nobody else in the organization was doing that. But he could do it as a leader because he could set the tone and be the role model. So it's very hard calls for discipline, but you can ask others for help.
Right. Now, here's an interesting question. How does emotional intelligence come into this picture in that particular process? Because you are mentioned in the book, emotional intelligence is a vital component for leaders. Yes, self-awareness, self-management, it's really important. How in this particular self-coaching process, it creates an impact?
It's really important. For me, it's linked to presence. So we all know what emotional intelligence is in our fields. But for me, it's about being present in the moment right now. So I'm not thinking about the past. I'm not thinking about the future. I'm just here with you. And because I'm here with you, I have the emotional intelligence to actually work out naturally what I need to do right now based on all of my experience, all of my resources, all of my talent, and trusting that. I don't need to think about it. We talk about flow, don't we? So when leaders are in flow and sports athletes are in flow, and they're not thinking about what they're doing. So for me, emotional intelligence is a key component which links to space, but it's about being present in somebody else's company so you can make the right decision in the moment without even thinking.
Interesting. So what you're saying is emotional intelligence, being in presence, play a vital role. With your experience, Andrew, any particular examples or experience you can share, like any particular leaders who have been struggling and after exploring this emotional intelligence within them have really transformed their self in terms with the self-coaching? Any experience you'd like to share if you have?
Yeah, I worked with a client. I'll tell you what the client was like at the start, but the client was very hardworking. They were a leader of a marketing agency. And I asked them one day to go and sit on a bench in Hyde Park in London for 2 hours and do nothing.
All right.
And at that point, the individual could not do it. They couldn't bring themselves to sit on a bench for 2 hours. They had the time to do it. They were the chief executive, but they didn't feel comfortable with their own thoughts. They didn't feel comfortable thinking about nothing. They felt it was a waste of time. So through the coaching and through their self-coaching, they learned actually when they sat with their own thoughts and took the risk around that and be courageous, they tended to find that they were most creative. They came up with ideas. They came out with ideas to unlock things. And therefore, that time spent enabled them to go back into their office environment and then actually make progress on these key problems because they'd taken the time out. So this took a lot of time. It took probably 6 months for this individual to really embrace this because for her, it was a waste of time.
Asking a CEO to just be idle is a very difficult task, isn't it? Right. So do you think at that particular moment?
But she grasped it, yeah.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Carry on. No, I was going to say she grasped it in the end, but it was very difficult for her to contemplate, and it was with support from her colleagues say, look, I need to create some space for myself. Please don't ring me at these times. Please don't contact me at these times. Please don't put meetings in at these times, and that will help me to create the space.
Right. You were saying that they need to be idle for 2 hours, thinking nothing, and they come up with creative ideas end of the whole process. Do you think boredom has led to that particular result?
It's not, I think what it is normally is we've got so much thing going on in our mind that takes us away from the present moment. And if we actually just go into the present moment, what will happen at that moment is that things will come into our mind are pertinent to the present moment and the situation we find ourselves in without even trying. But if it's all blocked with all things from past and worries and anxieties and what ifs and should ifs and how should I be and all these worries, then the creativity cannot come through. And this is in my experience where chief executives can best spend their time.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. I think it makes a lot of sense when you're reconnecting to yourself, right? you need to develop this whole element of self-awareness, being in presence, because we tend to always think about the past, the experience, bring that experience to sort out different problems and challenges in our life. So thank you very much, sharing. I'm slightly moving into the second phase of your whole process. You talked about refocusing it. Now, in this whole process, what exactly refocusing about the leaders does it?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. In part of the book, I actually refer to essentialism, which is a concept created by Greg McKeown. And if you've not read the book, listeners, then it's certainly worth a read. And what he talks about in that book, which I encourage all my clients to do, is say, if I've got this dream that I want to achieve, both personally and professionally, there are probably only 6 to 8 things that I need to do as a leader to actually achieve that dream that nobody else can do. I'll give you an example. Let's say I want to double my profitability in my business and yet spend time with my family at the same time, rather than actually sacrificing that. Then the only things I can do that only I can do in relation to that is manage the relationship with my board, manage the relationships with my peers and direct reports, manage the relationship with my family at home, and probably set the tasks for my team. They're the only things that I need to do to be successful in that. Everything else is not essential. And yet too many chief executives and leaders spend time on things they like doing. So for example, somebody who works in an engineering business or a software business, they get to the chief executive position, but they still like to tinker in the software elements. But it's not essential for them to realize their dream. So it's about letting go of the things that aren't essential to you. And that's the key part of the focus.
So what I'm hearing from you, you're saying that, and when a leader moves into that particular position, they still hold that particular execution processes rather than thinking about more strategical element. Is that correct?
Yeah, now it might be, I agree, it might be that one part of them being successful is to make sure they think strategically. It may be that actually they have to exit a business in 2 or 3 years' time to work with a private equity company to achieve a sale, and therefore it isn't strategic. It's about the operational capability of the business. So it's not always that strategic thinking isn't needed. It's what's pertinent to you and your own personal situation. But it's usually 6 or 7 things. I've written them down. I did that for myself. And this is where I spend my time. And part of it is educating others, which is why I'm spending time with you.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. We know in a coaching process, accountability is vital, right? Coaching need to really take accountability on what is. In self-coaching, how does accountability comes in? How does it work?
So accountability is really, I guess, 3 things. The first thing is about having self-discipline. So if I say that I'm going to do this call with you today at this time, then I show up and I do this call. I don't have an excuse about why. And also about my daily routine, my health, my fitness, how I show up to work. It's all about my own self-discipline. The second is, because we're human beings, is actually asking for help from other people when we're trying to change our behaviors. So for example, if I am late for a meeting, I'm trying to change my behavior to make sure I'm on time, but I might need your help to give me a reminder about a particular meeting so that I do turn up on time. So it's asking for help to be held to account, which is a very interesting concept, which I think Marshall Goldsmith talks a lot about, is the concept of feed forward. Feed forward is a very interesting process, which is very different to feedback, because feedback is very defensive in nature. You have to try and remember what we talked about. Feed forward is simply, I am trying to turn up more often on time. When you, as my person in the relationship, sees me turning up on time, I'd like you to give me some really positive feedback about me doing that, so it reinforces my behavior in doing so. So feed forward, again, is a vital part around accountability and having those daily tasks around how I show up in particular environments.
Right. Brilliant. I think today I saw a post on LinkedIn, one of my connection post about feedback of Liz Foslin, right? Then brilliant. I think the whole interpretation is brilliant. But then I ask about, okay, are we still talking about feedback rather we talk about feed forward? Because it's as you said, it's reinforce people, right? Reinforce people in terms of how they want to see in the future, right? So thank you very much for sharing that. And Andrew, how come the trust component comes in your refocus?
Yeah, the trust is really interesting. Again, many leaders, in my experience, and I'm no exception, find it very difficult to trust other people. And the reason for that is that we've learned to be self-sufficient, we've learned to be resourceful, and we've learned not to depend on other people. Because if we did that, we'd feel let down and we might as well do it ourselves. So it comes back to about delegating effectively as well. So for me, trust is really interesting. Brené Brown talks a lot about vulnerability. And for me, trust is built by the leader showing vulnerability in the first place. So it's actually demonstrating they're human, demonstrating they made mistakes, demonstrating that actually they don't always know the answer. And by sharing that with other people who are in their key relationships, they build trust that actually they are a human being as opposed to just being the boss. So for me, trust is a key component. And again, many leaders don't know who their key stakeholders are in terms of their future. And they should find out those by looking at the whole stakeholder map and seeing which people trust them and which people don't, and then spending many time in relationships to build that trust. And that might just be over a coffee, it might be over a half-day brainstorming session together, it might be for a walk with the dog, whatever it is, but spending time with somebody, showing your vulnerability, builds trust.
I think spending time is the most important part, because when we ask leaders, they're always busy, isn't it?
Absolutely. But they choose to be busy. So for me, again, it's about choosing to create space and time for my relationships. Very important.
Right. So we talked about reconnecting. We talked about refocusing. Now, regenerating. And you have mentioned in your book, resilience is a vital component in this particular process. How does it connect? Why resilience?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I talk in the book about some misconceptions about resilience. So in the olden days, many years ago, resilience was about being tough, bouncing back, showing that you can actually overcome hardship. I think the view has changed now. For me, resilience is all about being in the right state of mind at any point in time, so that when a challenge comes along, you can deal with it in the moment in a state of presence. So it's all about necessarily looking after yourself. So it's about recognizing I need space. I need to have good mental health practices. I need to be good from a physical health perspective. I need to recognize that I need that space and time around me so that I can think about things properly and reflect. So for me, resilience is so important, because if you do all those things I talk about, when something happens that's bad or a bump in the road, it means you're actually able to deal with it in the moment because you already have the resources from within that you've built up over the years. So it's a very interesting debate about the importance of resilience and the changing perspective of that.
Interesting, because as you said, we always talk about bouncing back, right? So I'm just wondering, can we bring agility here on this particular perspective?
Yeah, agility is part of that. And it links a little bit into the point I made that if you are already feeling resourceful in the moment because your presence, you will automatically be agile to be able to deal with that moment. Now, athletes demonstrate this very well. So whether you're a tennis player or whether you're a football player or whatever it might be, you have that ability in the moment to show agility if you are present. So yeah, it's a major part.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. You did mention about mental fitness when we talk about the resilience. We all know that leaders need to have that strong background in becoming mental fitness. What exactly you talk on this particular area?
It's a really good question. And again, many leaders, for many reasons, have a lot of negative thoughts. We have many negative thoughts as human beings in a day. And what mental fitness is about is actually taking time out again and reflecting and really understanding when I'm feeling negative, how that impacts me, how it impacts my relationships, how it impacts my focus. And in the moment, changing that from being negative to having a choice of being positive. So I like to talk about mental fitness by being, if I feel frustration or resentment or anger or negativity, looking at what the gift is in that. What is the gift and the opportunity when I'm feeling like that, and move to a much more positive mindset. So we talk, I think, Shahzad Shamin in his book that I refer to in that chapter talks about being the sage. rather than us being too judgmental of ourselves, being the wise part of ourselves. And in this moment, how can I move away from negativity into positivity? And so that's what that's all about. Again, it's practice, because we sometimes get into this negative spiral of thinking negatively, particularly as a chief executive, when things are going badly for us.
And that's why we say we are human beings, right?
Absolutely.
It will come, but that's how we need to really manage the whole negative experiences. Thank you very much for shedding a light on that particular perspective. So Andrew, I think we're coming to the end of our conversation. I just want to end up, my last question for you is teams and the culture perspective. How does this teams and culture perspective comes for self-coaching?
Well, this is the journey. So if you go on the self-coaching journey through the cycle and you get to a stage of the different elements we've talked about, you are in a position as a leader to start role modeling authentic leadership. And therefore, you can ask your team to start stepping up and you can delegate more effectively so you can focus on your essential tasks. Now, when that happens, you need to support your team because the team hasn't been used to working in that way. And they need to develop their own self-coaching ways of working with their own behaviors and what's expected of them. And there is it's not in the book, but there is an approach to self-coaching teams where teams learn to coach themselves with the help of the leader, and they become more effective and they become more high performing over time, building trust, accountability, managing conflict. And so they feel safer as a team to both develop themselves, but also challenge each other in the team to develop our team members. So it's a very important point, but it can only happen when the leader has stage in their own development where they can let go, the team develop under their leadership.
So you mean to say that you don't need to keep an eye on them, on the teams?
It's more about clear direction, clear goals, clear purpose, and then being there for the leaders in the team when they actually get blocked, rather than managing them, micromanaging them. And that's the secret in sort of letting go, because the leaders should be just focusing on the tasks they have. They shouldn't be doing the detail of all those leaders that are in the team. And that's the hard bit. It's very hard to let go.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you very much for sharing that, Andrew. Unfortunately, we have, that's time what we have. But before I let you go, I just want you from something. I always ask for a golden nuggets from my guests who checks in for our listeners. What would be one key tip you can share with our audience on this particular process?
It comes back to something that we talked about earlier, and it can be scary for some. But all I would say is spend more time alone with your thoughts and actually just reflect on the questions. Who am I? Why am I here on this planet? And then once you reflected on that and contemplated it and got some idea about why you might be here, which may be very different to what you're doing now or very similar, just share that with a friend, a family member, and somebody else. And before you know it, you have the semblance of a dream which you can start working towards.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Andrew. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the time that we have for today. My key takeaway is 3R. 3 R's: reconnect, refocus, regenerate. I think that gives a lot of easy for us to connect, reflect back, and rework on our processes. So, Andrew, thank you very much. I hope our listeners got plenty of key takeaways on this particular episode. Of course, you can get connected to Andrew via his LinkedIn profile or log on to www.talentspartnership.com. All the podcast note will be, all the details will be available on the podcast note. At the same time, you can log on to Amazon and search for Self-Coaching for Leaders. A fantastic book, highly recommended. I'll put the notes and the links on the notes as well. Andrew, just before you let me know, just one quick question. Have you visited Sri Lanka? Any chance?
I haven't. It's on my bucket list. So I look forward to meeting up when I come over.
Yes. So I'll be much happy to, assist you. And I'm just one call away when you're dropping by. Of course, Sri Lankan hospitality is the next level, so you'll enjoy for sure. On that note, once again, thank you very much, Andrew, for all the time you spent and sharing your thoughts. Brilliant. And I wish you all the very best and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting. Goodbye.